Hey! Welcome back to the Stick Figure Historian channel, guys. This is episode 10 of the Scotland series. In our previous episode, we covered the Battle of Falkirk, which, though it was a defeat for the Scots, the English still couldn't really claim a full victory over the country. So, we left off with King Edward calling a truce in the fall of 1300. It was July of 1301 before he returned. This time, he had a new strategy. Instead of concentrating all of his army into one force for a single strike, he would make an assault on two fronts at once. He himself led an army into the southeastern part of Scotland, whilst his son, Prince Edward, would take another band of soldiers into the southwestern reaches. The southwestern part would be the hardest to win, Edward knew, and he wanted to give his son a chance to make a name for himself in the conquest of it. Sure enough, John de Soulis and Ingram de Umfraville attacked Prince Edward at Lochmaben. And in case you're wondering who this John de Soulis dude is, he was yet another one of Scotland's guardians in this tumultuous period. He had taken up de Umfraville's position when he resigned. Anyway, the prince's forces were able to brush the Scots aside, and they continued on to one of their main targets, Turnberry Castle. This was the birthplace and beloved home of Robert Bruce, and the seat of his lordship in Annandale. And seeing as Bruce still refused to come again into the servitude of England, his castle had earned the particular wrath of Edward. Bruce himself was fortunately not present at the time, for despite his men's resistance, the fortress fell before the prince's hordes. De Soulis and de Umfraville watched from a distance as the royal banner of England floated up over the stone walls, flashing its proud red and throwing the three golden lions to the wind. They had followed Prince Edward here, but had been powerless to give any real aid to the men besieged in the castle. There was nothing more they could do here. They put spurs to their horses and led their men away to the east, to see what could be wrought against the father of their woes. The Scots met King Edward at Bothwell, but despite their efforts, were as easily repulsed as at the first. Longshanks and his son reunited in Linlithgow. They had marched through a good half of Scotland, but for all that, there was little to show for their efforts. Sure, they had a few towns and castles to their name, but the real fighting power of Scotland remained largely untouched. There was the whole of the north to be contended with, for one, and the warriors of the south were eluding confrontation now, hiding out in the hills and forests, simply avoiding Edward for the most part. It is quite difficult to fight a foe that you cannot reach, King Edward was finding. Simply marching through their territory was not a sufficient claim to a conqueror's title. In January of the following year, 1302, he made another truce with the nobles. It was during this truce that Bruce's fortitude crumbled, and he came back to pledge his sword anew to Edward. There are many reasons this could have been. We cannot pretend to know the mind of someone, especially when that someone has lived over 700 years ago, but some have made a few suggestions. Some say that Bruce was simply disheartened by the fall of his beloved Turnberry, and by the scores of men that he had lost in the battles against the English king, and wished no longer to waste both blood and treasure in a cause he deemed hopeless. Another theory says that he returned to England's service at the request of his father, who was growing ill and did not wish to see his son waste all his lands and the family's honor upon an effort of madness. And yet others say that Bruce had a more devious reason for defection. It is possible that Bruce joined Edward again in order that his main rival for Scotland's scepter, John Comyn, could be weakened, or even perhaps destroyed by the English king. Then, once this was done, Bruce planned to break his allegiance again and take the throne for himself. As I said, perhaps it was for one of these reasons, perhaps it was for none of them. We cannot truly know. The next year, the truce had ended, and once again, Edward was back on the warpath. He sent John Segrave out as a spy to view the land just west of Edinburgh. But the Scots would have none of it. Comyn and Simon Frazer ambushed Segrave's little scouting band. The English put up a fight, but Segrave and several of his knights were badly wounded and captured. But the little scouting troop was only part of a larger force that Segrave had brought along. And when these came up and discovered what had happened, they hurried to find their commander, and eventually succeeded in rescuing him from the Scots. All in all, though, the mission was quite a failure. Edward chose to leave the north alone for the remainder of that year. The joy of the Scots over their victory was unfortunately short-lived. Though they had never received any material help from King Philip IV of France, for years the Scots had still trusted him as their ally, and for a time he had proved very useful as a distraction to turn the rage of the English king away from them. But all that was to change now. Philip was weary of war with Edward, and was ready to go beyond a mere truce with him. No, he wanted a formal peace. And in the terms of this peace, he forgot his Scottish friends entirely. In siding with Edward, he was now siding against them. And with Philip's support went Pope Boniface's as well, for he was a close ally of Philip's. The Pope took back some of the harsh things he had said against King Edward, and began to look at the Scots in a different light. Such is the cruel world of politics and selfish men, you see. There is no real love or principle in their hearts. Thus, Scotland was left without a friend in the world, alone in a battle against an enemy thrice her size. It was spring of 1303, when Longshanks carried sword and flame into Scotland, the 5th time in 6 years. We must at least give him the credit due his perseverance, though so ill-placed. The battle strategy this time was quite similar to the previous campaign. The lot of the Prince of Wales, that's one name the Prince of England is often called. I won't get into why right now. It's kind of weird. Anyway, his lot fell to the west, and that of his father to the east. Only this time, William Wallace himself led the resistance against them. He had returned from Europe the year before, discouraged perhaps, but not at all defeated. He believed in that for which he fought, and had purposed in his heart to stand to the last, no matter how impossible the odds. King Edward rode proudly throughout the whole of the country, proclaiming his ill-gotten kingship over all he saw. By August, he was deep within the Highlands. In Moray, he took Castle Avoch, the home of the valiant Andrew Moray, and finding the warrior's little 5-year-old child there, stole him away from the arms of his mother as a hostage. The poor little boy was carried off in the royal retinue, as Edward tromped his way back down into the lowlands again, where he settled down to wait out the bitterness of a Scottish winter. But again, all Edward's efforts was nothing more really than a lofty show of power. For all the way Wallace and his men had followed on his trail, nipping at his heels and drawing blood, but refusing to engage in any real, so-called, battlefield kind of fighting. Any towns or castles Edward had taken, any empty words of allegiance he had gained from the nobles, meant nothing, as long as this army of rebels roamed about working their vengeance against him. They must be destroyed. He knew not how.